Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on this sunny Thursday afternoon. My name is Mike Tansey from Silver Sands. I'm the Account and Marketing Director, and with me today I have the wonderful James Mallew, our Principal Consultant. Between James and I, we've helped build hundreds of SharePoint intranets over the years, and we are excited to be sharing our tips and tricks for building and maintaining a modern SharePoint intranet in 2024. For those that haven't been to a Silver Sands webinar before, I'll run you through just a little bit of housekeeping. So today's session is being recorded, a copy of which will be made available to you all tomorrow. For any questions, we're holding 15 minutes at the end of the session with James, but we also have our colleague Rob White, our Microsoft 365 lead, on the webinar. Rob will be monitoring questions as we go, so if you do want to post any questions, put them in the Q&A tab at the top of the window. And finally, just say we're offering a free one-to-one workshop for each of the companies here today. This is a consultant-led workshop, and it's to discuss your specific intranet with one of our specialists. So to take us up on this session, simply tick the request follow-up box on the survey, and one of our team will be in touch. Okay, so before I hand over to James, I'll kick off with a short overview to Silver Sands. I can see we've got a lot of customers here today, but also some new faces also. So a very quick overview on a slide. Silver Sands, we are a Microsoft consultancy and we specialize in Microsoft 365, cloud and hybrid infrastructure. We work across 4 key areas. The first area is Microsoft 365, which includes over 50 applications such as SharePoint, Teams, Viva Engage and OneDrive, to name a few. Microsoft 365 also includes your Windows operating system and enterprise mobility and security for protecting those endpoints and devices, really anything that touches your corporate data. The second area we focus on is Azure and infrastructure, so traditionally helping customers with their on-premises server estate, Active Directory, SQL environments, and now certainly over the past 5 years helping transition those customers into the Microsoft Azure landscape and moving that infrastructure into the cloud. The third business area for us is the Power Platform. So we design, build and maintain apps, dashboards, automation processes, all for our enterprise clients. These improve business efficiencies and help eradicate those dreaded manual processes that we all hate, or any paper-based processes as well. And the fourth and final area, we provide a mixture of support services, and this can be from break-fix support through to managed services. And from an intranet perspective, we also offer proactive support, so keeping your comms and your IT teams up to date with the latest changes from Microsoft. This will be specific to your intranet and can help you navigate the ever-changing landscape from Microsoft and take advantage of some of the latest features that Microsoft push out all the time. So across all of those technology areas, there are a number of ways that we actually engage with your business. The first one is technical readiness. So this is looking at where you are today, where you want to get to, and how to bridge that gap. And we do this through a number of ways, through workshops, through strategy sessions, and through design activities with our customers. The second area is migrations. So this could be a file server to Microsoft 365 migration. It could be a SharePoint to SharePoint Online migration. It can involve prepping your data for a move into a nice new shiny intranet, for example. The third area is governance, security and compliance, all very important for an intranet project, especially for protecting your data within your Microsoft environment. For an intranet, for example, again, you may want to make sure that your policies, your procedures, your guidelines are not able to be shared outside of your organization for obvious reasons. And lastly, on Silver Sands, user adoption. So you can deploy the best intranet in the world, but if nobody knows how to use it or how to get the best out of the Microsoft tools, the project could fall flat. So we provide user adoption and change management services to give our customers the skills they need to take on their new intranet and also drive engagement over the long term to foster new behaviors and encourage the organization to adopt the new intranet. So that's Silver Sands in the slides. I'll now pass over to James to kick off the webinar. James, over to you, please.
Thanks, Mike. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the session. So over the next 30 to 40 minutes, I would like to share some strategies, tips and advice around building and maintaining a SharePoint intranet. Now, over recent years, I've worked with many public sector organisations, both large and very small. And what I've wanted to do today is to take the topics that I believe are common across all of these organisations and talk about them here and present some advice, some recommendations on how you might approach that topic and tips around getting the best out of SharePoint. Now, I appreciate we've got a diverse audience. Some people may already have SharePoint deployed. Some people may be looking at refreshing an existing SharePoint intranet. Some people may be looking at their first steps towards building a SharePoint intranet. But I do hope that there's something for all of you in this session. And as Mike said, if you've got any questions, either around what I'm covering or perhaps what I'm not covering, please feel free to post a question into the Q&A and we'll get round to those at the end. So to kick off, an area that I like to start with, for most organisations, as part of the planning process, when you're defining your new intranet, is the concepts around organising, governing and protecting content. Now, actually, this is an activity that you can do with very little SharePoint experience or knowledge. And in fact, in some cases, it's best to do it without any SharePoint experience or knowledge to avoid clouding the key decisions that you have to make. Now, essentially what we're talking about here is most intranets provide signposts to applications, content, and resources that you want your employees to find. And those applications and content and resources may exist within the intranet, i.e. it might be content you manage within the intranet, or it might be content or applications that exists outside of the intranet, such as your public-facing website or within other SharePoint sites within your environment. Now, it is very important to define the content that will exist and be managed within the intranet. And that's because the second stage is to establish the principles that will be applied to govern the content that exists within the within your intranet. So key principles typically would include defining the ownership for a piece of content. Who owns it? Who's responsible for it? Now, I don't mean the person who edits it. I mean the job role or the department or the function. Who is actually ultimately responsible for that piece of content? Does that piece of content need to be reviewed regularly? Does it need to be reviewed every year? Does it need to be approved? And if so, by whom when it changes? So these are all questions that relate to the governance of individual pieces of content. When we talk about protecting content, what we're interested in is who has rights to view that content? Who has rights to edit that content? Who has rights perhaps to delete the content or share the content? And if they can share it, with whom can they share it? Does the content contain sensitive information? And in which case, does it require additional protection principles applied to it? So all of these things combined will allow you to then define a SharePoint architecture to manage all of that content. Now, I've got a very simple example that I want to walk through that, albeit very, very simple, it reflects all of those points I've made and gives you an idea of how we move from defining a set of content and the governance and protection principles to apply it, and how that relates to your SharePoint solution. So in my scenario here, I've got 4 different types of content. So I've got information that relates to the organization. So this would be maybe organization charts, information about different departments, teams, functions, services, and it comprises of both pages and documents. And that's going to be managed, in my case, by the comms team. I also have company documents. Now, it's a bit of a catch-all term to refer to policies, forms, guidance notes, could be templates, documents that have broad applicability to the entire organization. And in my case, these are all going to be PDF or Word documents. Everyone in the organization can read them, but people have responsibility for managing them across different departments within the organization. And a couple of other attributes that are unique is all of these documents have to be reviewed every year to confirm their relevant. And we also tag them against the department who is responsible for managing that piece of content. Now, moving across, we have news posts. Now, again, unique from the other two examples in the fact that we want everyone in the organisation to have the opportunity to post a bit of news. However, the comms team would like to approve the content before it perhaps is surfaced on the homepage of the intranet to ensure appropriateness, relevance, meeting your accessibility guidelines and so forth. What we want to do with the news articles is allow them to be tagged against a department or function area, or perhaps against a given scenario. So it could be a news article that relates to an event or a news article that relates to a social activity. And then finally, we have content in respect of well-being. And this is a combination of pages and documents. Everyone in the organisation can read this. And the content in this case is managed by our well-being team. So when I talked about establishing your content, this is kind of what I mean. And typically, I would suggest coming up with a content matrix. It could be an Excel document. It could be something else. But it describes the content that you want to manage within your intranet, who's responsible for it, and some of the other key principles about that content. Now, if you recall, I said it's important to define what exists in your intranet. And that's effectively because within our intranet, unsurprisingly named the intranet, all of this content will be subject to the governance and protection principles that we apply to it. This is very different from content that we might link to in other SharePoint sites that will not have the same governance and protection applied to it, or content that exists outside of your SharePoint environment, such as content on public-facing websites. And when it comes to pages, the pages that exist within the intranet will be subject to the branding and accessibility principles that you apply to them. Again, not so true for content that exists in your other SharePoint sites. So I just wanted to make sure that's kind of one of the key reasons why we define the content that exists in the intranet and the content that exists outside of it. Now, once we get to this point, we can then say, okay, how does this actually map into SharePoint? And I'm sure that many of you will know that a SharePoint intranet is typically comprised of at least one SharePoint site, probably has to be at least one SharePoint site, but possibly more sites. And there's often a lot of conversation about, well, how many sites do we need? Now, if I take the example here, we drive the structure of the site based on the needs of the content that exists within it. So in our example here, we've got one site that we're going to use to manage our organisation information because everyone can read it, comms team can manage. And within that site, we have got a single document library where we are going to set up the principles and policies that relate to managing company documents. Now, our news posts, everyone can post and they require approval. So we simply can't put them in the same place that we put them in the organisational information. It needs its own site. So in this case, we've got our own news site. And then finally, with our wellbeing content, we have got unique content because it's managed by the wellbeing team. So we're going to put it in its own site. Now, to ensure that the user experience in terms of navigation, in terms of search, in terms of branding is consistent, from a SharePoint point of view, we tie all these things together using what's called a hub. Now, I'm not going to get into that today, but what I wanted to demonstrate by showing this is that our intranet, the design of our intranet, is driven based on the content you want to manage within it. And it's very important upfront to define that content and not do it the other way around. Don't define your site structures and then work out where's content going to sit. Do it the other way around. So very quickly, if I go into my site and I show you, I've actually built this. Spoiler alert, it's not very exciting at this point. I've not applied any branding or content, but I just want to show you the principles in action. So we have 3 SharePoint sites. Here's our blank intranet site. Here's our protection label that says the content in this site can only be accessed by people who work within the organization. Okay, so this is a protection policy we're applying to the site. If I go into site access, You'll see here the comms team has full rights to everything, and the rest of the organisation can read everything. Pretty straightforward. If I go into my company documents library here, I've defined a set of columns that allow us to tag and track and govern the content. So, these are common sort of things like an issue date of a guidance document, the review date when it's due for review, type of document it is, policy, guidance, form, and the owner, who's responsible for it. And obviously I've defined the permissions appropriate for this library to ensure the relevant parties from around the organisation can contribute content. If I go into my news area, not very exciting, but nevertheless, we have our protection label applied, internal access. We go to site access. Comms team have full control. And you'll notice here, everyone in the organisation can submit content, okay? But what we've done is we've enabled content approval. So any new content that's added has to go through an approval process before it is published and visible to the wider audience. And then finally, if I go into my wellbeing site, similar principle, a label applied to the site that protects our content. And then if we go into site access, full control is the wellbeing team, okay? And access control is to everyone. So effectively, I've constructed the key containers and the key policies that will relate to the management of content within the intranet, okay? So now that we've done that, we can talk a bit about the branding and user interface design. So an analogy I use often with SharePoint is that it's very much like a box of Lego. There's a whole load of different bricks that you can put together in lots of different ways, and you can build some great things. But at the end of the day, it'll still look like Lego. And I think it's fundamentally important that when you embark on a project, particularly an intranet project with SharePoint, that you accept the constraints and the limitations that are inherently there in SharePoint. And I'm going to talk a bit about how you can understand those in a minute. What I would also say, and my top tip for achieving this, design in SharePoint. I've seen many projects where I've been involved with where a designer has been involved who has either no or limited understanding of SharePoint. It is almost a guarantee that whatever design they come up with will not be possible to implement within SharePoint, either in its entirety or parts of it. Design in SharePoint. It's a great tool for doing the work, and it doesn't require a huge amount of knowledge or understanding to get some pretty good results. I'm going to talk about accessibility in the next slide, but I would suggest live within the limitations and minimize custom development. I'm going to talk about this later on, but going back to my point, it's always going to look like Lego. It's always going to look like SharePoint. I can spot a SharePoint intranet, every time, 100% of the time. That's not to say you can't do great things. It's just to say, focus your efforts elsewhere, accept the limitations. So how would I go about understanding limitations and learning about building intranets in SharePoint? So what I would do is I would take a site. So let's say we take my intranet site, and I would use one of the many templates that Microsoft provide to allow me to see examples of pages that have been built. Not only see the examples, but actually unpack them, modify them, work out how they were done. So for my intranet, I'm going to take one of the Microsoft examples, of which, if you've got site ownership rights, you'll be able to do this for a site. I'm going to take my organisation home one. And this will add not only a home page, but it will also add some other pages. So it adds a few pages to have a look at. Now, I'm not suggesting that these templates is the done deal in terms of what you do with the intranet, not at all. I'm suggesting they are a great learning tool to understand what you can do with SharePoint. and they give you a good starting point and some good things to explore possibilities with your wider stakeholders. Okay, so this has added my homepage, and you can see it's added components to the homepage. It's added actually some branding, which I'll come on into a minute. It's added some navigation options, and it's added a couple of other pages that allow you to see how you might do other pages. Now, what can you do from this point? So I'm not going to cover everything in the time I've got available clearly, but I'm going to highlight a few really important points. So in terms of changing the look and feel of the site, the most common thing that I would do in almost 100% of cases is apply the color scheme in line with an organization's, defined branding. But just be aware, although this will give you the impression that you can do a lot with colors, and of course you can use your own color scheme, effectively, all you're doing is selecting a single primary color, one single primary color. Okay. Now you can do a lot with it, but don't be under the illusion that it's anything other than one primary color, and that's what one works with. Okay. The next thing, something recent that Microsoft have introduced, which is a great thing, is custom fonts. So if you don't like the Microsoft default font, you can select either one of the other pre-packaged fonts, or you can use your own fonts, providing you're licensed to do so. Now, this is a good step forward, but again, just be aware, you can't define which font to use here and here independently. This is basically a one size fits all, and it will elect the size of the font, the weight of the font to use in the different places. Nevertheless, it's a good step forward. When it comes to the header, you've got a few options. Okay, so you can define your header to be various different things. You can define your color of your header. That is the primary color, by the way, that you would select. And you can select a logo. But for instance, the logo is a predefined size. And sometimes the logo size, particularly in the square, doesn't really support a lot of detail. So be careful about designing something that requires a logo that has any degree of detail in it. Okay. Let's go with that. Let's go with that. And then last couple of things on here. Navigation, you've got two different styles of navigation. Okay, you've got two different styles of navigation. So again, if you design a navigation system that's not supported in either of the styles, you're not going to be able to implement it. Okay. Okay, so that's some of the things in terms of how you brand and design the site. When it comes to the pages within the site, you can do a huge amount here. So pages are very flexible. They are effectively made up of a series of sections that define the overall structure of the page, and then you add components into those sections to surface or display content. So if, for instance, my frequently used resources, I want to put up here, and actually locations of times for a UK organisation, not really that interesting. So I'm going to take that off. And for this, I'm going to change the style of it to say, I'm going to have it as buttons. And perhaps I want the buttons to have a filling color. Okay. So I can do some things like that. I'm just going to bring some news in here so you can see what I can do to present news. So we've got some news articles here, and I can select the way that news articles are presented. Okay. But again, remember, if what you want to do is outside of these, you're into the world of customization. And with some exceptions, in my opinion, you're going beyond where you really need to go with SharePoint. So it comes back to understand what it can do, design in SharePoint, see where you get to, identify the potential limitations, and then we'll talk about how you deal with customization later on. Okay, so designing for accessibility is very important, fundamentally important. But actually, different organizations' approach to accessibility, what they mean by accessibility, what they want to test for, varies considerably. But a common question I am asked is SharePoint Online compliant with the WCAG Web Accessibility Guidelines? And as a consultant, I can give the great answer, which is it depends. And I'll explain why it depends. So Microsoft publish a set of compliance reports that will tell you the level of conformance of all their products against different standards. Okay, so there's a link in the slide, by the way, to this, so you can go and look at these yourself. So I've done a search for SharePoint and I've said, okay, I'm interested in the WCAG conformance report for SharePoint Online. Just be aware that if you use other products in your intranet, be it Power Apps, be it Microsoft Lists, be it Stream, they all have their own independent conformance reports. So you may need to look at more than just the SharePoint one. But if we look at the SharePoint one, it gives you whether it conforms to level A and double A. It doesn't give you anything for AAA. But the key thing to note here, this is talking about SharePoint Online as the service provided by Microsoft. It is not referring to the content that you as an organization put into SharePoint Online, be it pages or documents. So just be aware of that. Now, in terms of the report, again, read at your own leisure, but it's worth saying that there are level A and double A where the response is partially supports, partially supports, partially supports, and there's even a couple here does not support. Okay, and to give you an idea of some of these, particularly ones that come up quite often that I've seen, there's one here called info and relationships. So effectively a web page, typically you would use heading tags. So heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4 to structure your content. SharePoint has a habit of preventing you sometimes from creating well-structured pages in terms of headings. And that's simply because web parts always, as of today, output a level 2 heading, which may not be what you want. You might want a level 3 heading. This is changing, by the way. There is something rolling out as of today, which allows you to specify headings. But this is something that SharePoint pages often will fall foul of, is you don't get a correct structure of your headings. Now, obviously, what as an organization you need to do is define what you need to achieve in terms of accessibility, to define what that means in terms of the SharePoint design, what it means in terms of the guidance you have to provide to content authors, and what it means in terms of what you will be doing to test. So, yeah, as I said, every organization has a different view of this. So definitely consider this and plan for this up front. Know what it is that you're aiming for. Now, with both of the previous things I've spoken about, both accessibility and designs, it's very important to ensure that you maintain the level of brand consistency and accessibility throughout your intranet. And it's not always going to be a small set of people who develop pages. You really do want to allow the widest possible people in your organization to submit and maintain content. But to help them do that, I can't stress enough how important it is to provide effective page templates. And what these templates do is provide guidance and principles and guardrails, if you like, to help users build pages that represent your brand and conform to your accessibility standards. Okay, so simple example. If I go into SharePoint and I generate a new page, and I click blank page. So the user's basically got no guidance, no principles in terms of layout, no principles in terms of the use of headings, no principles in terms of the use of the header, nothing. So it's not surprising if you use this type of approach that lots and lots of pages will be created inconsistently. So the way to kind of address this is to define templates. And templates are effectively copies of pages that act as a starting point for people to use. So if I say select a page, I'm going to select one of the Microsoft ones. So this is a video page. So if we contrast this with a blank page, this page has a predefined header, actually a style of header, and an image that's already there. It has an area where it says, this is where you're going to host the video, post the video. So the user thinks, okay, I don't have to think, how do I put a video onto a SharePoint page? It's already got the component on that allows me to select the video. So I can go and select my video. And then it's got some sections. Now, admittedly, what I would do here is I would add guidance text into these sections to tell the user what it is they need to fill in. So you could say, okay, just highlight it in yellow. I didn't mean to do that either. Made a bit of a mess there, but give the user guidance within the page to say, use a heading 2 tag to do X, Y, and Z. Add the list of people that are in the video here, or extract a soundbite from the video, put it here, make it a heading 2. Whatever you want to do, put the guidance into the page, because when they come to start filling in the page, although you can't stop them doing what they want in a page to an extent, you can at least help them. And making page templates is simple. So if I create this page, I'm just going to publish it. Once I've published the page, I can save it as a template. So I can just say, okay, this is going to make a great template. So I'm going to call the template my template. Click save. And now when users come to generate new pages, I can go to my template. Okay, and I can make this the default template that they get to use. So I would definitely encourage you to use templates. Spend time on defining the template, and particularly defining the guidance that you're going to add into the template to help people to understand how to use them. Okay, so the previous two sections, I've talked about quite a few things that relate to designing your intranet, either in terms of the structure or in terms of the branding. But I'm just going to switch gears slightly here and talk a bit about helping people to find content. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because whenever people share with me surveys they've done to their wider user community about their intranet, I can pretty much guarantee that in the top 10, there'll be some feedback, not positive, about SharePoint search. I can't find what I'm looking for. It doesn't work. Why can't it work like Google? To name but 3. And my response always to that is, what work do you do on a regular basis to monitor, investigate, and respond to what the search analytics are telling you? Now, I'm sure everyone who's got an intranet in the audience today will say, we do this, we do it regularly, and we get great results. So obviously I'm not talking to you, but all those other people who don't do this, they are missing a big trick, because quite simply, it is the easiest win in terms of improving discoverability and findability of content. So as an example, in my intranet here, I have gone to Search Intelligence Insights. And this gives me a whole load of stats about how the search is being used in my environment. So it talks about the most popular search terms. I'll come back to that in a moment. But what I'm interested in for now is the top 10 no result queries. So these are basically searches that people are doing that they're not getting any search results for. Or alternatively, the searches that people are doing where they're not clicking on any of the results. They do the search, it returns something, and they've abandoned the search basically. And what I'm looking for is, well, what is it that they're searching for? So this is telling me that people are searching for the word head office, Dorset, and HQ, and they're abandoning the search. Now, admittedly, in my environment, it's just me doing the search, so the figures are very low. But in your environment, if you see this, then the question is, what is it that the user's looking for? Now, you might not actually know, because it could be something very specific to a function, a service area. It could be an acronym that's not familiar to you, but it's worth investigating. So I know that if someone's searching for this, they're probably looking for information about our head office, which is in Dorset. So I'm instantly going to address the problem by using what are called search answers and adding in an entry for our office in Poole, Dorset. So I've added an entry and I've said, trigger this entry if someone searches for HQ, Poole or Dorset. And to show you that in action, what happens is when the user does a search, so let's do a search for Dorset, it will return everything that we usually expect it to return. But at the top, it adds this card. And this is effectively what my search answer is. It's the card that I've told the search to say, doesn't matter what else you return, I want this at the top of the list. So if I put HQ in, it also returns it. And if I put in head office, it also returns it. Now, if we go back to our search results, let's have a look at another one. So I noticed that a lot of people are searching for CBT. And I'm thinking, well, CBT is an acronym. Okay. Now, I've had a guess at what I think they're searching for, but I'm not quite sure. So what I've done is in my search answers, I've set up an acronym. In fact, I've set up two acronyms for CBT. So when a user now does a search for CBT, again, irrespective of the search results they get the definition of the two acronyms. Best not to mix these two up, by the way, if you're going to book a course. And if I go to another example, so again, back to my query analytics, P11D. So people are searching for P11D. Where's my P11D? What's my P11D? Now, for that, I've done a bit more research and I've looked at, there's quite a lot of things people could be looking for when they're searching for a P11D. So what I could do is I could go to my HR team and say, or finance team, whoever's responsible, could you generate a page that discusses various topics to do with P11Ds and then publish it? Or I could create a mini page, which is what I've done. So if I search for the word P11D, I get this card and I get this mini page at the top that provides information to people and links to various different things. So in all cases, what I've done is instantly influence the search based on the search insights that it's telling me, and made sure that when people search for things that previously aren't returning results, at least it is returning a result. Okay. And then over time, as you look at what people are searching for, you can see how often these answers, as they're called, are being used, are being clicked upon, and how useful they are. Now, in some cases, it's a quick fix, and you probably do need to go back to content owners and say, you really need to provide some content about this. But as I said, in terms of a quick win, these things are fantastic in terms of instantly changing search that doesn't really work to search that does work. And you can do this on a, weekly, monthly, 6 monthly basis, but definitely worth looking at. The next thing I'm going to cover is really about addressing a problem that I often hear, which is people aren't going to the intranet. So we've even tried to make it the homepage of our browser. So when the browser pops up, the intranet's there. But generally, people aren't going to it. When you look at that, it could be because a lot of people in your organization might be mobile and their only sort of electronic access they have on a day-to-day basis is through a mobile device and possibly through email. So if they're not coming to you to read your content, take your content to them. And there's a feature that was introduced in SharePoint in the last 12 months that has proved to be very useful, taking into account a couple of limitations. And it's basically this concept of made for email. What it allows you to do is to generate a piece of news content. And with that news content, you can send it as an email. And I don't mean as a link to SharePoint, I mean actually as a complete email. So let me show you an example. I'm going to create a news post. And for the news post, I'm going to say generate a newsletter. And again, using a template as a starting point. Now, it's a normal SharePoint page, so there's nothing particularly special about adding the content. But what I am going to do is when I send it, it's going to say, who would you like to send this to? And this is how the actual newsletter will appear in the email. Okay, it's not being sent as a link. I can give it a title and I can specify people to send it to. Now, just an important point. These can only be people within your organization. If you want to send this to someone outside, you'd have to forward it to a mailbox and then forward it from there. I can only specify distribution groups, Microsoft 365 groups, or individuals that exist within my organization here. Now, when the email is sent, it will be sent to the person's inbox. But what's important is the usage analytics for this news article will be tracked inclusive of the people who just read it through their inbox. So you can still get view counts for the pages to understand how many people are using it. Just go into my mailbox, but it usually takes a few minutes for it to. There you go. So let's have a look and see what it looks like. So that is the content. And as I said, that is all in the inbox. There's no having to link back to SharePoint to view it. Now, it's worth stating that that feature is coming to all SharePoint pages soon. But there is some things you need to be aware in terms of what you can and can't use in the page. But it is something that all pages made for email will be made for email very shortly. Okay. So last section before we end. In respect of integration and customization, there's really three key points that I want to touch upon here. The first one is Microsoft Viva Connections. And this was launched maybe 2 years ago. And it does have a lot of overlap with the SharePoint intranet. But I'm increasingly seeing these things as overlap, not replacement or duplication of. So effectively, if you're not familiar, Microsoft Viva Connections is a Microsoft Teams-based app that allows you to display a kind of dashboard that provides users with announcements, news, a set of tools, and links to resources. Now, you could say, surely that's similar to your intranet. And on the face of it, it is. But with Viva Connections is focused about really providing that personalized experience for an end user based on their particular role. And if I just show you the example in my environment here, if I go into Teams, and in Teams, I have an icon, an app here for Viva Connections, and this is Viva Connections. And it's displaying some news content to me based on content that exists in both SharePoint and Viva Engage. It's displaying a set of tiles to me. Again, these are personalized to me, that are showing a whole combination of things. So for instance, it's showing me my next payday. I hope that's not true, otherwise I'm going to have a hard time between now and December. It's showing me my numbers of days off. So obviously this is, that's integration into a back-end system. And it's surfacing some information about my days off, what I've had in the current year. And I can potentially from here navigate to SharePoint, or I could say, actually, I don't want to display any of this, just display my SharePoint Intranet homepage. Now, what I would say about Viva Connections is you need to plan for it, and you need to consider whether the use cases that it supports and it provides are applicable for the scenario that you're focusing for your intranet, or potentially, is it there to provide some other scenarios, to support some other use cases. So don't always take it as being, if you're doing a SharePoint in intranet, we'll just turn on Viva Connections, because Viva Connections introduces things that are not specific to SharePoint. They are independent of SharePoint, and there are some additional planning considerations to take into account. I've put a link to the guidance, which kind of explains a lot of the background to it. Now, I said before about customizing SharePoint, and my answer is always limit your customizations. Of all the projects I've done over the last few years, only a subset have had what I call true customization. And what I mean by customization, it is a component that requires deployment into your environment. All the other scenarios are catered for using out-of-the-box SharePoint or other applications in the Microsoft 365 suite, be it Microsoft Forms, Microsoft Lists, Power Apps, etc. If you do have a requirement where you believe that your only option is customization, ask someone who knows a bit about SharePoint. Make sure that it is actually something you cannot achieve out of the box. Make sure it's actually something that's applicable to do in SharePoint. Never, ever do this. I saw an intranet recently where their developer had decided that because they wanted to change fonts on different parts of SharePoint pages, they effectively changed the CSS in SharePoint pages. Never, ever do this. Your SharePoint site will break, if not tomorrow, it will the day or week after. So do ask someone whether what you're trying to do is actually possible. And before you build products yourselves, look at third-party products. There's some great ones out there that do some scenarios that are difficult to do out of the box. And do look at the thing called the PnP Modern Search. These are an open source set of components that allow you to present content on SharePoint pages and allow a little bit of flexibility. They're a great set of components. If you do decide to customize, and it does happen, please make sure you follow the patterns and practices as set down by by Microsoft about what you can and can't do in SharePoint, because you'll see all the things here that tell you what you can and can't do. And do take into account performance, security, and accessibility for what you are developing. So my last thing I want to mention today is Copilot. And it would not be a Microsoft session in the modern era if someone didn't mention Copilot at least once. But I'm going to talk about something that was recently announced that I'm very excited about, because I think for intranets, this is a use case for Copilot that is perfect. So if you imagine in my earlier example for an intranet, I said we'd have a company document library and we put all of our policies, procedures, guidance notes, forms in there. Now, if people want to navigate and search for that, of course they can use SharePoint Search. But what this will allow us to do is within a few clicks, set up a Copilot that allows people to use the power of large language models to ask questions of all the content that exists within that library. And apologies if this is a bit small there, but effectively we've got a panel on the right-hand side of the page, some initial prompts that could be, I don't know, what is my P11D? How do I get paid? That type of thing. And then the user can type in natural language what it is they want to ask. And this will then present the information back to them from those authoritative documents. And I've got a little video that I'm just going to run because I can't show you this in action.
Over 2 billion pieces of content are added to Microsoft SharePoint every day, just waiting to be shared and used. But how do you find the information you need when you need it? Now you can get a tailored Copilot experience from SharePoint or OneDrive, giving you and your team a simple way to get the answers you're looking for, grounded in your content. As an everyday user, you can quickly create a Copilot right from where your information is stored. It's as easy as creating a folder, but way more powerful. Once your Copilot is ready, easily share it with others. It works alongside you and your peers, like a digital assistant for your team, department, or even the whole company. Now everyone can quickly surface the information they need, grounded on curated, authoritative content. Want to customize the Copilot or add data sources beyond SharePoint? Just use Copilot Studio, which directly integrates with SharePoint. Unlock the knowledge embedded in your content. Give your team the information it needs to boost collaboration and drive business forward by easily creating a Copilot in SharePoint and OneDrive.
Very cool. Well, I thought that's very cool. So I'm very excited to see it. Caveat, they haven't announced licensing, but it wouldn't surprise me. And I don't know, but I suspect this will be part of the Copilot 365 licensing. But more will be announced soon, I'm sure. Okay, so I'm hoping that I've covered at least one or two things for you that have either given you an idea or given you a bit of guidance or given you something to think about in terms of what it is that you might do in building or maintaining your current SharePoint intranet. Mike.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. That was absolutely fantastic. I think lots of golden nuggets in there, hopefully for people to take back and apply to their intranets. Particularly like the bits around the accessibility. I think that's got to be at the forefront of every public sector organisation at the moment. And how to pin search results to the top to stop those abandoned searches. So yeah, thank you very much. I'm just going to post a link again into the chat box. So just a reminder, if you've liked what you've seen today, don't forget to book your free one-to-one follow-up session with James and the Silver Sands team. The one-to-one sessions are really designed to build on what you've heard today, but tailor it specifically to your requirements. So to book that, click the follow-up button on the survey and we'll be in touch. So I think we've got about 7 minutes left, James. There's quite a few questions in the Q&A. I think maybe we'll start with running through some of those and then just open up to wider questions.
Sure. So there's a question here. Apart from Copilot, is the rest of what you showed included with E3 licensing? Absolutely. Yeah. So I haven't showed anything today, and I'm sure Rob will poke me if I'm wrong here, that is not covered under normal E3 standard SharePoint licensing. Microsoft roadmap in terms of branding, colors and font. So the font thing that I showed is the preview of the fonts, being able to use custom fonts. Please be aware that if you want to use your own fonts outside of the ones that Microsoft give you as options, you do need to be licensed correctly for them and you need the font files. There is some articles that Microsoft provide on how you deploy those. But the thing I've seen as being more of an issue is how you licensed for that font. If there's an organization you're already licensed for it, I'm sure it's fine. But just be aware you must be licensed for any custom fonts you're using. In respect of colors, the thing that is provided as part of the fonts is something called Brand Central. So it's a new SharePoint feature which allows you to centralize the manage of fonts, organizational assets, which is already available today, templates and images. And there is some additional functionality coming which relates to imagery and color schemes. One thing I'm not clear on is whether there's going to be increased flexibility on the color schemes that you can apply to SharePoint sites. I mean, don't get me wrong, although I have made it sound very limiting, there is quite a lot you can do, but there are still limitations in terms of colors you can use, and I haven't seen anything that's kind of doing a lot to address that. Okay, yeah, so there's a question about our intranet as a key resource for accessing resource and practice tools. We need to easily search or preferably filter. Is this possible in SharePoint? Absolutely. So one thing that I always suggest you look at in SharePoint, the default search experience, which is essentially a set of tabs. They're called search verticals, but for us, they're tabs that effectively allow you to filter the content that user sees. And for each of these tabs, you can define the filter characteristics. So if I'm in files, for instance, excuse me, I can filter by file type and last modified. If I'm in news, I can filter just by last modified. If I'm in images, last modified, etc., etc. You as an organization can add tabs, and with each tab that you can add, you can specify the filter criteria. So very often you'd have a tab up here that says company documents, and the filters are specifically to say filter by type of document, policy, procedure, guidance note, filter by the department that's responsible for it, that type of thing. So definitely that's where one of the options in terms of how you can provide a more focused search experience that not only returns the content that you want it to, but allows the user to filter or refine it based on your own custom filter criteria.
I think, James, one of the popular questions in the Q&A that's been liked a few times is from Robin. It says, in our experience, SharePoint Online analytics is rather limited. Can you recommend a more comprehensive, compliant tool that will work with SharePoint Online?
So analytics is a bit of a complicated subject because it depends on what you're looking to provide. So I'll kind of cut to the chase here. If you want to use Google Analytics, you can integrate Google Analytics into SharePoint. There are some things to be aware of if you want to do that. Microsoft themselves have Microsoft Clarity, which is an additional analytics tool that you can plug into your SharePoint environment. Those are the two that I've probably done the most amount of work with. But I would find, just make you're not missing a trick with what SharePoint Analytics gives you, that you're not actually able to answer what it is that you're looking for. Certainly when it comes to search, the search analytics that you get across your Microsoft 365 environment, and particularly in SharePoint, are very detailed. You know, none of the other analytical tools give you that type of feedback of what people are doing, where they're doing it from, etc. So yeah, just there's never one size fits all. Just make sure you explore the options. But Google Analytics or Clarity, Microsoft Clarity would be kind of my two off the top of my head ones.
Thanks, James. I think there's another one here. So what would you recommend where content overlaps? As an example, say a wellbeing policy. Should this be stored in the company docs area? Assuming yes, this will mean it will also be stored in the wellbeing site. So I think it's a single document that maybe need to be surfaced in multiple sites or folders. I guess, what would you recommend there, James?
So the key word there is surfaced in multiple places, but managed in one. So, you know, I'm not going to give you a definitive answer because it's not always right, a question of one size fits all. But in my example, my wellbeing policy would be in my central company documents library because that's where all policies are published. But that doesn't preclude me from surfacing it in the wellbeing side. The thing that you kind of want to avoid is a lot of organizations already have SharePoint sites that that are created to support team activities, department activities, HR site, finance site, IT. And in those sites, those departments manage the master copies of the policies, the Word copies that they use to master the PDF copies. That's fine, right? But I'm personally not a great fan of having company-wide documents distributed across all of your SharePoint environment. And that's because it's very difficult to apply consistent governance across all of your SharePoint environment. It's better, where practical, to have a location or set of locations that are well-defined, well-governed, well-managed, that act as a repository for authoritative content in your organization. And that does mean that the departments, that when they update their copies, their sort of Word copies, they do have to publish it into the central repository. But we're trying to make sure that your intranet acts as your authoritative source of content. And that's why I would kind of define a central location or a set of central locations, and try and kind of stick to that and deal with the exceptions around the edge.
Perfect. And I think, James, we've just hit the time there as well. So there's probably a few Q&A questions. We'll follow up with each of you individually after the session as well. And yes, the recording, the slides, we'll share all of that with everyone tomorrow as well. So just want to say thank you, James. Thank you, everyone, for great participation in the event. And we look forward to seeing you on the very next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.